All right. So we were discussing the two assertions. The first term stage in child language literature has been used in the sense of a point on a continent, and also in the sense where we build upon the continuity requirement and add a new requirement that the continuity has been altered, meaning which the there's a stage. This stage shows that there's a particular point, and this point indicates that this is the point of progress, and all it also indicates that some other point has where the development, the language acquisition development has been halted. Now the second assertion says that the stage, the second assertion is that there is no other use of the term to add a restriction to the two already mentioned, that is, the stage of progress versus the stage of, where the development has gotten halted. Now, there is no other use of the term to add a restriction to the two already mentioned, which restricts the term stage to the cases where the behavior that has plateaued is expected to change again at some later time. Now, the second assertion is claiming that the term stage is not used in any other way than the two that are mentioned above. However, this statement is false because it ignores an important aspect of what stage can mean in child language development. Now, why is the second assertion incorrect? So, while the first assertion captures the two common uses of the term stage, that is, a point of development versus the point of, where the progress gets halted. So, the two common uses of the term stage, it misses out on a third potential meaning, which is about anticipating future changes. When we say a child's development has reached a stage, it often implies not just that the development has paused or plateaued, but also that this plateau is temporary and will eventually lead to further changes or progress. For instance, a child might be in a stage of using single words. While this stage is a point on a continuum, point on a continuum, and can be seen as a temporary halt in progression, we expect that the child will eventually move on to using two-word combinations. This expectation of future change is crucial part of understanding what stage can mean. So the second assertion is incorrect, whereas the first assertion is correct. Now, moving on to the next question. The next question talks about Martin Bryan. Martin Bryan. So, what is the concept that is associated with Martin Bryan? So, it's the pivot grammar. The pivot grammar is basically, it was developed in the 1950s and 60s, which explains the two-word combinations that are used by children in while they are acquiring language. Now, can you elaborate more on when did Martin Bryan propose this pivot grammar? What work did he propose this pivot grammar into? What really is pivot grammar? And all of the other informative aspects of this concept.
Pivot grammar, proposed by Martin Bryan in the 1960s, is an early model of child language acquisition that focuses on how young children form two-word combinations during the early stages of language development. This model emerged as part of Bray's work to understand how children begin to create simple, meaningful sentences with just a couple of words. What is pivot grammar? Pivot grammar posits that children's early utterances are typically made up of two types of words. 1. Pivot words. These are limited in number and appear frequently in the child's speech. They often include words like more, all, no, want, etc. 2. Open words. These are more varied and can be any content word, such as nouns or verbs. For example, cookie, dog, or run. Structure of pivot grammar. In a two-word combination, the pivot word typically appears in a fixed position, either first or second, while the open word varies. For example, more juice, pivot open, juice gone, open pivot, no bed, pivot open. Significance of pivot grammar. Pivot grammar was significant because it provided insight into the patterns of early language structure. Brainy observed that despite the simplicity of children's speech, there was a consistent structure, which challenged the idea that early language use was entirely random or chaotic. This model helped linguists and psychologists understand how children start to construct meaning in their utterances, even when their vocabulary and syntax are limited. Application in child language development. The pivot grammar model suggests that children are learning to organize their thoughts and communication in systematic ways from an early age. It laid the groundwork for later theories in child language acquisition that delved deeper into how children develop syntactic rules and more complex language use. Brain's contribution. Martin Brain's work on pivot grammar was part of his broader contribution to psycholinguistics, especially in understanding the cognitive processes behind language acquisition in children. His research emphasized that even in very early language, there is an underlying structure that reflects the cognitive development of the child. In summary, pivot grammar is a model that explains how young children begin to form structured two-word combinations during early language development, highlighting the systematic nature of early speech patterns.
Now, what is sensory motor development? Is it something like a real thing in linguistics and specifically psycholinguistics?
Sensory motor development is a concept that originates from developmental psychology, particularly in the context of child development, rather than being specific to linguistics or psycholinguistics. However, it is relevant in these fields when discussing the broader process of language acquisition. What is sensory motor development? Sensory motor development refers to the progression of a child's ability to coordinate sensory experiences, like seeing and hearing, with motor actions, like reaching, grasping, or walking. This development occurs primarily in the early years of life, during what Jean Piaget, a renowned developmental psychologist, termed the sensory motor stage, which lasts from birth to about 2 years of age. During this stage, infants learn about the world through their senses and actions. They begin to develop object permanence, the understanding that objects continue to exist even when they are not seen, and they start to build the foundational cognitive structures that will later support language acquisition. Relevance in psycholinguistics. In psycholinguistics, sensory motor development is important because it lays the groundwork for the later stages of cognitive and language development. Before a child can use language, they need to have a certain level of sensory motor coordination. For example, object recognition. Understanding that objects have a continuous existence helps in the development of nouns and the ability to label things. Intentional actions. As children gain control over their movements, they start to perform intentional actions, which is a precursor to the intentional use of language. Sound production. The motor control involved in producing sounds, like babbling, is part of this sensory motor development. As children learn to control their vocal apparatus, they begin to experiment with sounds, which eventually leads to the production of words. Is it a real thing in linguistics? While sensory motor development is not a linguistic concept per se, it is closely related to psycholinguistics because it forms the foundation upon which language abilities are built. In psycholinguistics, researchers might explore how sensory motor skills influence language development, particularly in the early stages of a child's life. In summary, sensory motor development is a critical stage in early childhood that involves the coordination of sensory input and motor output. While it's primarily a concept in developmental psychology, it plays a significant role in the early stages of language acquisition, making it relevant to
Stop it. I'll have to
psycholinguistics.
go back. Now, so sensory motor.
Sure, let's go back to the previous questions.
Fuck.
Would you like to continue discussing the concept of pivot grammar by Martin Brain? Or do you want to revisit the assertions about the language faculty and stages in child language? Let me know how you'd like to proceed.
I wanted to ask if the sensory motor stage, this thing that we were discussing, um, if this was proposed by Stephen Krashen, because probably Stephen Krashen proposed some of the stages of in the development of mental development of the child. For example, sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, and then formal operational stage. So he proposed a few concepts. Now, please be a little precise because I don't have much time. So I don't want your bookish elaboration. So I want it to be concise but informative at the same time. So keep it that way.
The sensory motor stage is not a concept proposed by Stephen Krashen. It actually comes from Jean Piaget, a developmental
Piaget.
psychologist. Piaget outlined this stage as the first of his 4 stages of cognitive development in children. It occurs from birth to about 2 years old and involves infants learning about the world through their senses and motor actions. Stephen Krashen, on the other hand, is known for his theories on second language acquisition, such as the input hypothesis, and did not propose stages like the sensory motor stage.
So it was Jean Piaget who proposed these concepts of sensory motor development, pre-operational stage, formal operational stage, things like that. So can you briefly elaborate what stages were proposed by Jean Piaget regarding the child language acquisition? And please be brief. Be brief. Do not make it too elongated or too explanatory.
Yes, Jean Piaget proposed 4 stages of cognitive development in children. 1. Sensory motor stage, 0 to 2 years. Children learn through sensory experiences and motor activities. 2. Pre-operational stage, 2 to 7 years. Children start using language and develop symbolic thinking, but lack logical reasoning. 3. Concrete operational stage, 7 to 11 years. Children begin thinking logically about concrete events, but struggle with abstract concepts. 4. Formal operational stage, 12 years and up. Abstract thinking and problem-solving skills develop, allowing for logical reasoning about hypothetical situations. These stages explain how children's thinking and understanding of the world evolve as they grow.
Now, what about the biological foundations of language? What is it? Explain in brief.
The biological foundations of language refer to the idea that the capacity for language is rooted in our biology. Key aspects include 1. Genetic basis. There's evidence suggesting that certain genes, like FOXP2, are involved in language development. 2. Brain structures. Specific areas of the brain, such as Broca's area and Wernicke's area, are crucial for language production and comprehension. 3. Critical period hypothesis. There's a critical period during early childhood when language acquisition is most effective, highlighting the biological preparedness for language. 4. Language universals. The existence of common features across all languages suggests a universal innate grammar, often linked to Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar. These foundations emphasize that language ability is deeply embedded in our biological makeup.
Now, the rule-based descriptions of child language. What is that?
Rule-based descriptions of child language refer to approaches that analyze how children acquire language by understanding and applying specific rules. For instance, it looks at how children learn grammatical rules, such as verb conjugations or sentence structures, and use these rules to generate new sentences. This approach often involves examining patterns and regularities in how children produce and comprehend language, focusing on the systematic aspects of language learning.
Is there a particular person who is associated with the rule-based descriptions of child language?
Yes, the concept of rule-based descriptions of child language is often associated with M. Brain. He proposed the idea of pivot grammar, which describes how children use a limited set of rules to generate a broader range of sentences. This approach emphasizes how children apply specific grammatical rules to understand and produce language.
Now, the next question is infant vocalizations have a role to play only after the acquisition of some lexicon, no role in language acquisition, a role of just reproducing what is made available by mothers, a role in enabling the child to discover his or her articulatory capacity. So I think that's the correct one. Infant vocalizations have a role in enabling child to discover his or her articulatory capacity. Briefly explain what this statement means.
Infant vocalizations, such as babbling, are crucial because they help babies explore and practice the sounds they can produce with their vocal apparatus. This process allows them to develop the motor skills and control needed for more complex speech sounds as they grow. Essentially, these early sounds are the groundwork for later speech development.
The hearer employs a set of perceptual strategies to connect only to the body language of the speaker, extract semantic information directly from the surface structure. Now, the correct answer is to extract the semantic information that is directly available in the surface structure. Now, can you explain what goes on behind a hearer employing perceptual strategies, and what are those perceptual strategies, and then the extraction of semantic information from the surface structure? And please be brief. Do not be very elaborate.
When a hearer uses perceptual strategies, they focus on understanding the meaning of what is said based on the surface structure of the language, such as sentence structure and word choice. These strategies involve listening to how information is presented to infer its meaning directly. The goal is to decode the speaker's intended message from the way the language is structured, rather than relying solely on context or nonverbal cues.
Now, which of the following is not true of cognitive linguistics? Which of the following is not true of cognitive linguistics? First, it understands grammar in terms of conceptualization. It addresses within language the structuring of the basic conceptual categories such as time and space. There is an autonomous linguistic faculty in the mind, and it claims that
The statement, "there is an autonomous linguistic faculty in the mind," is not true of cognitive linguistics. Cognitive linguistics views language as part of general cognitive processes, not as a separate autonomous faculty.
And what about the other three statements that are mentioned in the option, among the options, that it claims that knowledge of language arises out of language use? So how do these three statements that are correct, how do they relate with cognitive linguistics?
Cognitive linguistics holds that 1. Grammar in terms of conceptualization. It sees grammar as connected to how we conceptualize and categorize the world, not as a separate set of rules. 2. Structuring of basic conceptual categories. It explores how language structures concepts like time and space, reflecting how we think about these concepts. 3. Knowledge of language from language use. It argues that our understanding of language comes from our everyday use and experience rather than innate rules. rules. These ideas reflect the core view that language is intertwined with general cognitive processes and experiences.
Now, the next has again two assertions. The first, in discrete point tests, many elements are tested at once. The second assertion, in integrative test, they focus on the test of one linguistic element at a time. Now, I think both of these are incorrect, and their definitions have been interchanged because in discrete point tests, one element is tested at a time, whereas in the integrative test, they focus on many testing of many elements at once. Now, can you elaborate and exemplify what this really means? Like, for example, a hypothetical test, example of a hypothetical test which can demonstrate the discrete point test and the integrative tests.
Sure, let's break this down with examples. 1. Discrete point test. This type of test focuses on assessing a single linguistic element at a time. For instance, imagine a test that only evaluates knowledge of verb tenses. It might present sentences and ask the test taker to correct the tense errors. Here, only one grammatical feature, verb tense, is targeted in each question. 2. Integrative test. This test evaluates multiple elements of language in context. For example, a test might present a short passage where students need to understand and correct various aspects, such as verb tense, sentence structure, and vocabulary usage. The goal is to assess how well the test taker integrates different language skills in understanding and producing language. In summary, discrete point tests are more focused, while integrative tests look at the use of language more holistically.
Now, the next question is the language of advertising can afford to bypass the requirements of first, the grammar rule, second, the syllabification process, third, meaning of the word, fourth, phonetics of the sound. So, the language of advertising can what can it bypass? So, phonetics of the sound cannot be bypassed. Now, can you elaborate how the language of advertising can bypass the grammar rule, syllabification process, meaning of the word, but not the phonetics of the sound, and also exemplify.
In advertising, the language often prioritizes attention grabbing elements over strict adherence to conventional language rules. Here's how. 1. Grammar rules. Advertisements might use unconventional grammar to create memorable or impactful phrases. For example, Think Different bypasses standard grammar for a catchy slogan. 2. Syllabification process. Advertisers might create brand names or phrases that don't follow standard syllable breaks to make them easier to remember or to fit a specific rhythm. For instance, Kleenex uses a non-standard syllabification to make it distinctive. 3. Meaning of the word. Ads might use words in ways that deviate from their usual meanings or create new meanings to convey a particular image or emotion. For example, refreshing might be used in an abstract sense beyond its literal meaning. 4. Phonetics of the sound. Phonetics cannot be bypassed because the way words sound affects how they are perceived. Effective advertising often relies on the phonetic appeal of words to create positive associations or memorable jingles. In summary, while advertising can play with grammar, syllabification, and meaning, it must consider phonetics to ensure that the message is clear and appealing.
The next question is the effective lesson has following parts in the respective order. So, an effective lesson has following parts in the respective order, and the correct order is preparation, presentation, practice, evaluation, and expansion. Now, I would love to have an acronym to remember this order of effective lesson. And I want you to elaborate on why this specifically is the correct order of an effective lesson. Plus, explain me the acronym that can make me, that can help me remember this for a long time.
The order for an effective lesson is indeed preparation, presentation, practice, evaluation, and expansion. Here's a quick breakdown of why this sequence works best. 1. Preparation. This is where you set up the lesson, including defining objectives and planning activities. It's crucial because it lays the groundwork for what's to come. 2. Presentation. Here, you introduce new concepts or skills to the learners. It's essential to present the material clearly and engagingly. 3. Practice. Students apply what they've learned through exercises or activities. Practice helps reinforce the material and allows for hands-on application. 4. Evaluation. This stage assesses how well students have understood the lesson. It includes testing or reviewing to gauge learning outcomes. 5. Expansion. Finally, you build on what's been learned, exploring related topics or applying knowledge in new contexts. This helps deepen understanding and encourages further learning. To remember this order, you can use the acronym PPPEE: preparation, presentation, practice, evaluation, expansion. Think of PPPEE as a sequence that guides you through planning and delivering a lesson effectively, ensuring each step builds on the previous one.
I don't think I can remember this because PPP, again, I'm going to be confused about either to put practice first or presentation first or preparation. So that's the confusion. So PPPEE doesn't work. Now, give me something else, something like a sentence which I can use and remember, which is self-explanatory and gives me this order after decoding the sentence.
Sure. Try using the sentence, "Please prepare pretty exciting evaluations." Here's how it breaks down. Please, preparation. Prepare, presentation. Pretty, practice, exciting, evaluation, evaluations, expansion. This sentence helps you remember the sequence of steps and the importance of each part in a memorable way.
So what is it? Please prepare what?
Please prepare pretty exciting evaluations stands for please, preparation, prepare, presentation, pretty, practice, exciting, evaluation, evaluations, expansion. It's a way to remember the order of steps in an effective lesson plan.
Please prepare. Please prepare practicing. Please prepare pretty exciting evaluations. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Please prepare pretty exciting evaluations. Should help you remember the order of preparation, presentation, practice, evaluation, and expansion.
All right, moving on to the next one has two assertions. First, the main objective for the manifestation of language is the speech or the speaking ability as opposed to the written form. Second assertion, the term oracy has been coined in analogy with literacy to refer to the ability of speaking and listening comprehension. So both of these assertions are indeed true, but I need the explanation for the second assertion. The term oracy has been coined in analogy with literacy to refer to the ability of speaking and listening comprehension.
It seems like there's a mix-up. The term you're looking for is actually oracy, not odyssey. Oracy is used to describe the ability to speak and understand spoken
Oracy.
language,
Oracy.
paralleling the concept of literacy, which refers to reading and writing skills. Oracy focuses on developing skills in speaking and listening, emphasizing their importance just as literacy does for written language.
The next question is the morphological case of a noun phrase depends not only on its function but also on the relationship that the noun phrase has with its verb phrase. Such phenomena is called I don't know case agreement, case government. That's case government. Now, please elaborate.
Yes, you're correct. The phenomenon where the morphological case of a noun phrase depends on its function and its relationship with the verb phrase is called case government. In linguistics, case government refers to the way a verb or other governing element determines the case that a noun phrase takes. For example, in languages with rich case systems like Latin or Russian, the form of a noun phrase, such as whether it appears in the nominative, accusative, genitive case, etc., depends on its grammatical role in the sentence and how it's related to the verb. For instance, in a sentence like, she gives him a book, gives is the verb governing the cases of her and him. In English, this is less pronounced because English relies more on word order than case endings, but in languages with more case morphology, the verb determines the case form of the noun phrases directly.
Cool. Now, moving on to the next one. First assertion. Earlier typologists like Schlegel and Humboldt believed that languages have an abstract organic unity. That's understandable. They have an abstract organic unity, meaning they have underlying principles that are common apart from the differences in the surface structure of various different languages. So, the second assertion now, the formal aspects of language and the changes that happen to these forms over time were not random because these changes are reflections of an inner character of the speakers who speak these languages. So, both of these statements are true. Moving on to the next question. Greenberg talked about language universals. The next question, an explicator compound verb has a delexicalized verb that is V2, which helps the main or the polar verb to get its meaning explicated. That is completely true. The second assertion, the vector or the explicator verb that is V2 can never contribute its full lexical meaning in an explicator compound verb. I don't think this is, I mean, this might be true because V1, that is, the main or the polar verb is the meaning of the sentence. V2 can only be tense inflected. So let's go with both are true, but I don't think this is going to be right. Yes, I sensed it. The second is false. It is incorrect to say that the vector or the explicator verb, that is the V2, can never contribute its full lexical meaning because it can contribute its full lexical meaning in an explicator compound verb. Now, I want you to elaborate more on the second assertion and give me example or exemplify how this statement could be proved incorrect.
You're right. The second assertion is indeed problematic. The idea that the vector or explicator word V2 in an explicator compound can never contribute its full lexical meaning is not entirely accurate. In explicator compounds, the V2 can contribute some level of meaning. For instance, consider the English compound toothbrush. Here, brush is the V2, and while it might not fully express its meaning as a standalone verb, it still conveys its lexical meaning related to brushing. In some cases, the V2 in compounds does carry specific meaning that complements or clarifies the main word, V1. For example, in the compound bookcase, case contributes to the overall meaning, indicating a type of storage specifically for books. Thus, the second assertion fails because the V2 can indeed contribute significant meaning, albeit often in a more specialized or context-dependent way than when it stands alone.
I was thinking about V2. So it's not a compound noun. It's a compound verb that we're talking about. So compound verb has to have something like khana, khaya. The English stuff. But okay, let's move on to the next question now. The next question is non-nominative subject or dative subject construction in South Asian language fulfills the following requirements of subjecthood. The first is the subject must asymmetrically see command all the elements in the sentence. Second, the subject must co-index with its anaphor with an anaphor. And the third is that the subject must be controller of a big pro. And then the fourth is that a finite verb in general agrees with the subject of the sentence. So a non-nominative subject as in general, dative subject construction in South Asian languages fulfill the following requirements of subjecthood. Now, all of these statements are true. The first, that subject must asymmetrically see command all the elements of the sentence. The second, that subject must co-index with an anaphor. Third, that the subject must be a controller of a big pro. So this is not correct. This is not correct. It is incorrect to say that in order to, a non-nominative subject or a dative subject construction, in order for an element to be a non-nominative or a dative subject construction, it is not necessary that it should be a controller of a big pro. But there are a few things that are for certain, that it should asymmetrically see command all the other elements within that sentence. The subject must co-index with an anaphor. That is also a requirement, that such a subject, which is a non-nominative or a dative construction subject, it must be able to co-index with an anaphor. And then the fourth is that a finite verb in general must agree with the subject of the sentence. So these are true, but big pro, the condition of big pro, that the subject, such a subject, which is a non-nominative subject or a non-nominative subject or a dative construction subject, it should be a controller of the big pro. So that's not one of the correct statements or assumptions about the subject or the non-nominative subject or dative subject construction. Now, can you explain me how these all of these statements relate to the non-nominative subject or the dative subject construction in the South Asian languages? And why is the third one, that is the subject must be a controller of a big pro, why should that be incorrect about the non-nominative or the dative subjects in the South Asian languages?
In South Asian languages, non-nominative subjects or dative subjects can indeed exhibit certain behaviors related to subjecthood, but not all the conditions you mentioned are universally applicable. Here's a brief overview. 1. Asymmetrically see commanding all elements in the sentence. In many languages, including some South Asian languages, the subject typically must asymmetrically see command, i.e., have a hierarchical relationship with all other elements in the sentence to be considered a proper subject. 2. Co-indexing with an anaphor. Non-nominative subjects or dative subjects often need to co-index with an anaphor. This means that the subject must be able to refer back to itself within the sentence structure, which is a common requirement for subjecthood. 3. Controller of a big pro. The concept of big pro refers to a large pronoun that is often used in generative grammar to discuss how pronouns and null elements relate to subjects. However, this condition is less relevant for non-nominative or dative subjects. In many South Asian languages, these subjects may not need to control a big pro to fulfill their role as subjects. The requirement to control such a pronoun is more specific to certain syntactic theories and might not universally apply. For finite verb agreement, generally, a finite verb must agree with the subject of the sentence. This is true across many languages, including those with non-nominative or dative subject constructions. The verb agrees in features such as number and person with the subject, which helps to validate the subject's role. So while the first, second, and fourth conditions are relevant for understanding non-nominative or dative subject constructions, the requirement for controlling a big pro isn't always applicable. and can be considered an incorrect or unnecessary requirement for such subjects.
Now the next question talks about wheel car. Wheel car, so car has its parts, among which wheel is a part of the car. So this should be hyponymy, but it's not. So hyponymy is something like red scarlet, or or more precisely speaking, so animal, and then a cow.
It sounds like you're referring to the concept of meronymy rather than hyponymy. In meronymy, the relationship is between a part and its whole, like wheel being a part of a car. On the other hand, hyponymy involves a relationship between a more specific term and a more general category, such as scarlet being a type of red, or dog being a type of animal. So for your example, wheel car is an example of meronymy, where wheel is a part of the whole car.